Last week, Baker Mayfield walked away from an interview, mid-interview, just walked away. And I know it's an older story. It's this is last week's news. I get it, I understand. But I haven't talked about it yet. And I have something to add to the conversation. I believe that when everybody talked about this story, everybody's biases showed quite a bit. And it seems to me like everybody in the media left out some really important context to this story that you have to understand to realize, why did Baker walk away? What's the story behind the story? In fact, I think a couple important details, a couple angles, a couple really important viewpoints were just completely left out of the story. No one discussed it. And so in case you missed it, here's a soundbite of Baker where he gets up and leaves an interview early. Take a listen.
Penalty, so we were negative yardage.
No, but there was a lot of time between snaps.
Well, when the penalty happened, then we're behind the chains. No, stop saying but. I just told you the clock was running and we had a penalty. Do you want to give them the ball back? No, you don't play. You don't know it. That's just plain and simple. Was I happy with the drive? No, we didn't score points. It's the dumbest question you could ask. What? Jesus, Tony.
Okay, so everybody who heard what happened immediately jumped to criticism of Baker Mayfield. And I get it. I understand why. But to me, I'm a bit torn on how to feel about this. I try to be fair and unbiased when it comes to Baker. I think the best example of this is that sometimes he says and does stuff that I think is dumb, and I call him out on it. I say, hey, that's dumb. I don't agree with that at all. And then other times, Baker does stuff and says stuff that I agree with, and I defend him. I treat Baker on a case-by-case basis. I think that's the best example. I don't have an agenda. I call it like I see it. Sometimes I think he's in the right. Sometimes I think he's in the wrong. Now, in this one, I'm kind of on the fence. I'm somewhere in the middle. But most people in the media were not. Listen to the language, the headlines people wrote. Things like, Baker storms out of a press conference. Baker throws a temper tantrum and leaves interview early. That's not unbiased language at all. And here's what happened. Two big things happened in this moment. It was after the Browns and Patriots game, and a reporter was asking about a drive where the Browns failed to score against the Patriots. And the reporter kept jabbing and poking and cutting Baker off. He just kept, right at it, kind of pushing his buttons. And then the reporter asks, were you happy with the drive they didn't score? Here's the number one thing that happened. Were you happy with the drive? Baker said, no, of course not. We didn't score points. And he goes, Jesus, Tony, and he leaves. He walks away. And for context, the reporter asking Baker questions is a guy named Tony Grossi. And Tony Grossi has a long history of saying pretty crappy stuff about Baker Mayfield. Here's just a couple of things. Number one is that around the time of the 2018 NFL draft, which Baker was drafted in, and Baker, by the way, was the number one overall pick, Grossi ranked the quarterbacks in the draft class like this. He said, number one, Sam Darnold. Number two, Josh Rosen. Number three, Josh Allen. And finally, number four, anybody else. Didn't even mention Baker. And I get it. That's okay. You're bothered by that. That's petty. That's one thing. But then he kept comparing Baker Mayfield to Johnny Manziel. And Baker's not perfect. Baker, however, does not have substance issues. Comparing anybody to Johnny Manziel is incredibly disrespectful. I know people who worked with Johnny Manziel at Texas A&M. Oh my gosh. The stories I've heard are horrifying. Talk about substance abuse. The guy was a nightmare train wreck. Comparing anybody to Johnny Manziel is a really incredible ultimate insult. Tony Grossi also called Baker spoiled for wanting first-class airfare and accommodations on his pre-draft visits. Later that guy Tony Grossi compared Kyler Murray also to Johnny Manziel. Baker didn't like that. Baker defended Kyler Murray. Tony Grossi is a troll. He's really good at writing headlines and clickbaity material. I think reporters like Tony Grossi are kind of like weasels. They're guys I don't like, and if I was a football player, oh my gosh, I would hate talking to them. Grossi's been confrontational with Baker now for years. Years. You know what a cattle prod is? A cattle prod is like an electric shock device you use. You poke cows to make them walk away and move. Well, if you hold a cattle prod and you poke a bull, and then the bull kicks you and you go, oh, why would it kick me? You're an idiot. You poked a bull. You can't poke a bull with a cattle prod and then get mad at you when the bull kicks you, when the bull reacts. No, Tony Grossi knew exactly what he was doing. I don't feel good about Baker Mayfield. He got obviously frustrated. He left an interview. I worry when I see that. I question that. When I see that, I go, does Baker have the emotional maturity to handle a chaotic, stressful situation? And his inability to stay calm in that moment concerns me. Absolutely. I don't feel good about Baker Mayfield leaving that interview early, especially when you consider that Sam Darnold has been pelted with all kinds of horrible questions all season. First, Sam Darnold has dealt with the New York media with questions about mono, a kissing disease, what do you call it? Like a thing you get in middle school when you kiss somebody. He's dealt with mono questions, and then he dealt with questions because he said he was seeing ghosts. The questions Sam Darnold has dealt with this year, oh my gosh, horrifying. But Sam Darnold has kept his cool, been very calm, never stormed out, never got mad. Well, he could have been mad, but he hit it well, right? Baker lost his cool. Baker, in that moment, he boiled over. He was intense. He was confrontational. It didn't work for him. And I honestly think Baker, if he was listening to this right now, if you are listening, hey, hello, big fan. I think Baker would be frustrated. He said, I'm not Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold's a different person than me. But if you want to criticize Baker for losing his cool, go ahead. I totally understand it. But I would also ask, how would you handle that situation? There have been moments in my life, moments with professors, moments with coaches, where someone repeatedly says crappy things to me a lot, and over time it builds up. And eventually I'm like, I'm not dealing with this anymore. I walk away because no way am I going to put up with months of someone saying crappy stuff to me. I'm like, eventually you're like, dude, I'm just not, I'm above this. I'm not dealing with this. I'm leaving and walking away. So Baker was in a really bad moment in his life. He just got embarrassed by the New England Patriots, the best defense in the NFL, arguably them or the 49ers. Probably the 49ers. The 49ers have played tougher opponents. But Baker was just embarrassed on national TV against the New England Patriots, and then the troll guy shows up. The guy who said awful things about you for years. And man, I would like to think I would handle that well. I do. I hope I would keep my cool. But I'm human. I might have gotten flustered and frustrated and just decided to walk away too. I might have, and I'll be honest, you might have. That just, when you're in that situation, that happens sometimes. And there's another part of this entire thing, though, that I think is really important to talk about. Baker said another thing. This is number 2. Baker said something when he left that journalists and reporters really hate. I've worked for ESPN, for Fox Sports. Look, I've worked with these guys. Reporters hate this question. Baker, this phrase. Baker said, "You didn't play, you don't know. You don't play, you don't know." Insinuating that Tony Grossi never played in the NFL, so how could he possibly understand the NFL? How could he understand? How would his questions be worth it? Reporters hate that. It's like the worst insult you can give them. It's kind of like comparing somebody to Johnny Manziel, actually. And reporters and journalists see that. If you didn't play, you don't understand. Reporters and journalists see that as an attack on their livelihood, because it is. Not to some degree. I personally don't think it is, but I understand why some journalists look at that as a direct attack. Because some journalists think, if I didn't play in the NFL, am I not supposed to write? And then they're like, am I not supposed to do my job? Are you saying I shouldn't do my job? It's a suggestion that they're not allowed to write about football because they didn't play in the NFL. And I actually agree with Baker. If you didn't play, you don't understand certain things. I'm not saying you can't do your job. A lot of people in the media, though, are idiots, and they don't know what they're talking about, and they have inflammatory content, and they're weasels, and they do say and talk about terrible stuff. But there's a difference between a storyteller and an analyst. It's a different job. It's a different approach, and you're a different person, depending on which hat you wear. You can write about sports. You can be a sports storyteller without playing sports. You can recap what happened. You can tell stories. You can be a journalist and write about sports without ever playing in the NFL. Absolutely. But a storyteller and an analyst are different jobs. I personally try to do both. I think I'm a good analyst in football. I know my lane. I know that I'm not a basketball analyst. You'll never see a basketball film analysis video by me because I didn't play high-level basketball. I'm out of my league there. But I do quarterback analysis videos. I'm very proud of them. My work speaks for itself. I played quarterback in college, and I'm pretty confident and secure in my work. Go watch it if you want. There's a whole playlist. Go to quarterbackanalyst.com. You'll find my work. I know my role, right? And I'm confident in that. Tony Grossi, the reporter, talking to Baker, is not an analyst. He's a storyteller. And I think he's the worst kind of storyteller. He's a troll. He's a guy who creates these crazy headlines and clickbaity content. And look, I get it. I've done it too. 2 years ago when I first started Strong Opinion Sports, I had a very different approach. I had no idea what I was doing. And I was just trying to be like everybody else. And I've changed if you look at the last 6 months, the trajectory of my show, the content has changed. I try to be more reasonable. I try to be fair. I'm the fair guy on the internet because I guess that's my role here, is to be the reasonable person in the room. My brand is honesty. And when I say something today, if I say something outlandish or something you think is crazy, it has more weight though because I believe it. I'm not just saying it to get clicks or like some people in the media, man, they say stuff and you go, there's no way you believe this. You're just trying to make people angry. And so everything I just explained, the difference between a storyteller who tells stories about sports and an analyst who analyzes sports. Storyteller and analyst, they're different jobs. And I've never heard anybody say that before, and I don't think anybody in the media understands that. When someone criticizes a reporter saying, you didn't play, you don't know, what they're saying is you don't have a depth of a useful analysis because you didn't play the sport. Baker isn't saying Tony Grossi can't do his job and write about sports. He's saying there's a level of analysis you don't understand. So when someone yells at me and says, you didn't play in the NBA, why can you talk about the NBA? I can talk about the NBA. So don't ask me to break down LeBron James' jump shot the same way I could if I can talk about LeBron James' accomplishments and have fun and all kinds of stuff, right? And I think that's partly why the media was so hard on Baker. This whole thing here is the media felt threatened by what he said. He said, you don't play, you don't know. People in media that can't realize they're a storyteller versus analyst, they can't do all that work to understand all that. They felt threatened and attacked. So, of course, everyone in the media responded, oh, he's an immature dummy. Tantrum. He storms out. They used inflammatory words to frame it worse. It's all about framing. The media could have easily said Baker Mayfield walks out of an interview. I feel like I'm going on a long time about this. So, Baker walked out of an interview, and what concerns me here is his inability to stay calm. But I also think that, here's one of my final points, is Baker leaving that room, I think was smart. What if Baker stays? What's worse in this situation? Baker leaves an interview early, he's visibly frustrated. Or what if Baker yelled at a reporter the way Ryan Leaf did years ago? Or what if it got even worse? He gets riled up and he punches Tony Grossi. Baker removed himself from that situation before something bad happened. And honestly, I think that deserves a little bit of credit. The self-awareness to recognize, hey, I'd better step away from this. This is just not a good situation for me to be in. And no one gives him credit for that. Nobody gives Baker credit for walking away, which I think sometimes that's the mature thing to do, is say, you know what, there's nothing good for me to do in this situation. It's best for me to just step away for right now. So after he walked out, he put on Twitter, this is what he said. This is it, word for word what Baker said on Twitter after walking out of the interview. He said, everybody wants to hear the truth until they actually get it. I am who I am and always have been. Don't call it emotional when it's convenient and then passion when it fits. I care about winning, so yeah, I'm frustrated. If I was to act like it's okay to lose, then y'all would say I've gotten complacent. My sense of urgency is at an all-time high, and if I offend anyone along the way, that's too bad. I love that. I think that's phenomenal. I really love that quote. You know what I like to hear? And what I hear in that quote is a guy who wants to win. A guy who in the interview, I think that in that interview, Baker felt offended when Tony Grossi said, were you happy with the drive? Were you happy with failure? It's a personal challenge to Baker. I don't think Baker liked having his character questioned. Are you happy with failure? Of course not. Of course I'm not happy with the drive. Of course when I make a video and it's bad and no one watches, I don't feel good about that. Or when I make a mistake, I don't feel good about that. Of course Baker didn't feel good about a drive where they failed. He had a reporter in a bad moment who's been egging him on for years saying awful stuff, poking and bothering and bugging him. So that's the whole story. Screw the media. That's the part they didn't tell you. That's all the angles. Baker left the interview early. I'll leave it up to you. How do you think you would handle a horrible troll reporter who's been bothering you for years, asking you questions in a really hard moment in your life? Look, I hope I would handle that moment with grace and be calm. But I'm telling you, there are moments in my life where I've just said, hey, I need to walk away because some people, and it adds up over time. You're like, I need to just get out of this situation. It's not good for me. My name is Zach Schaumler. This is my podcast, Strong Opinion Sports. It's my favorite thing in the entire world. And I want to be very clear and open with the audience. My YouTube channel is monetized. What that means is that some of my videos make ad revenue. It's fewer than you think. A lot of them get claimed. But in the past, I've received donations from people on Patreon and PayPal. PayPal.me/Zach Schaumler. Patreon.com/Zach Schaumler. And because I'm making ad revenue, it felt kind of weird just receiving donations. I wanted to give something back for the donations. And so people who support me on Patreon can give me $1 a month, and that allows them access to a pool where they can ask questions. If you send me questions through Patreon's DM service, you comment on one of my posts on Patreon. If you give $1 a month, you can submit questions. And with my eyeballs, I look at every single question submitted. Then at the end of my podcast, I pick the best top couple questions and read them on the show and answer them in a segment I call Ask Zach. Now that's for people who have money and want to support me that way. If you have no money to give, no problem. I totally understand. I grew up in a mobile home. I've been a broke college kid. I totally get it. But if you want to help in some capacity at the end, you can support the show by telling your friends about it. Share it on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever it is. Help me grow by telling your friends about this show. It would mean a lot to me. If you believe in my dream and you believe in this show, tell your friends about Strong Opinion Sports. Guys, my name is Zach Schaumler. Thank you so very much, and hope you have a great day.